So it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you, I'm sure all of you know, Biwek Gairhe, who comes to us from the University of Florida in Gainesville, where he worked on some pesticide pollutants in orchards, citrus orchards,
Yeah.
right? And now he's working on soil health and organic farming. The main distinguishing factor of organic farming is that they don't use pesticides, at least not artificial ones, right? And this has been a learning experience for all of us, including the farmers who were attempting to do this. So I think we'll all learn quite a bit about the prospects for producing the bulk of our food, the staples, grain that goes into our daily bread and into the animals that we eat by organic methods, and some of the issues involved with that. So it's your floor to talk about your journey over the past 4 years.
Thank you, Dr. Weil, for the introduction. Thank you, Dr. Weil, for the introduction. And I'm thankful to all of you for your presence here this afternoon. I'm sorry I am having a little bit of sore throat today, so I need to clear my throat quite often. So I'll be talking about my PhD research titled Soil Health and Crop Productivity Impacts of 4 Strategies for Managing the Transition to Organic Grain today. In this slide, okay. So here is the presentation overview. I'll be going briefly over the background on organic grain farming, my research objectives, the study design, materials and methods, results, discussion, conclusion, and acknowledgement. So there is a lot of buzz around this word organic. So what exactly is organic farming? I picked this document, definition from one of the USDA documents. Organic farming is defined as an integrated farming system that strives for sustainability, the enhancement of soil fertility and biological diversity, while with rare exceptions, prohibiting synthetic pesticides, antibiotics, synthetic fertilizers, GMOs, and growth hormones. So in practical terms, the USDA National Organic Program, or NOP, has its own list of materials that are approved for organic farming or that are restricted in organic farming. And in practical terms, it is commonly understood as a farming system without using artificial or synthetic inputs. And as you can see in the pie charts there, organic farming constitutes of about 1.5% of the global agricultural land, and 6% of the product retail sales in the US is constituted by organic products, and even within that, organic grains only constitute about 10% of the total organic retail sales. And what is transition to organic farming? So the National Organic Program requires 3 years or 36 months of period with no application of any prohibited materials like synthetic fertilizers or pesticides or GMOs before you can get organic certification, and that's called the organic transition phase. So even though the current share of organic products in the market is pretty low, this graph here conveys that organic corn production is a growing industry in the US, but still way less than the conventional corn, which is the non-organic corn. In 23-24, the projected production was around 50 million bushels for organic corn, while the conventional corn production was around 15,000 million bushels. So you will also notice that the productivity of organic corn is about 60 to 70% of what we get in the conventional corn. That's about 178 bushels per acre. And to give you an idea, 1 bushel of corn is about 25 kilograms. And I didn't know when I came here that the weights of different crops is different for in a single bushel as well. So it's actually a measure of volume rather than that of mass. And as you can see, the organic grain product, the corn production is about 124 bushels per acre. And looking at the price, even though the productivity is less, the price per bushel of organic corn and soybean is almost double, as evident in these two graphs. The prices are much lower in the year 2024 than in 2023. That's probably due to the different market factors, but still way higher than the conventional grains. I also wanted to show you about the demand and supply side of organic soybean meal in the US, which is mostly used for poultry or swine production, swine feed. Even though the production is in increasing trend, the domestic production only covers about 1/3 of the total organic soybean meal used in the US. So this indicates that there is a great need and potential for US farmers to grow organic grain. As we have discussed in the previous slides, organic products, they fetch higher profit, they have higher market demand and potential to grow. Similarly, due to the sustainable practices employed, in organic farming system is often considered better in terms of the impacts it causes to the environment and food safety. However, converting your farm to organic from conventional, it's challenging in its own way. So the prospective organic farmers, they must give up their customary use of synthetic tools and techniques that they have relied for so many years for greater production in the conventional farming system, and they need to learn new techniques, especially during the transition phase where the soil fertility has not been built up much, and there are limited options like manure or cover crops for maintaining soil fertility. They face the problem with lower fertility and thus lower productivity. Similarly, weed management is another huge problem in organic farming. Tillage is the most common method that is used for weed control, since chemical methods are not permitted, and there are very few permitted chemical methods that we can use in organic farming, which are not that effective, but tillage can disturb the soil and cause issues like erosion and nutrient runoff. Also the market for organic products is another issue. Finding local markets nearby you for organic grain is a challenge, and I can speak about that from our very own experience. There is a debate in literature about the environmental impacts, whether the environmental impacts of organic production are minimal only when we are considering the impacts per unit of area, but not the per unit of product. So something that many literatures have agreed upon is that the change in environmental impacts due to the transition, organic transition, could either be positive or negative, depending on the particular system of practices utilized in the conventional and organic systems. So like I said before, it is common for the typical organic grain farmers to use tillage, which is a term used to describe the mechanical agitation such as digging or stirring or overturning the soil, and tillage is done for killing weeds, making seed beds, or incorporating amendments. Similarly, animal manures, poultry manure in our case mostly, and cover crops including legumes are used for maintaining soil fertility. If we come to Maryland, then the farmers which are considered to be conventional or non-organic, they already practice these eco-friendly techniques such as no-till. 74% of our cropland is no-till. We have strict nutrient management plans to minimize the nutrient transport loading in the Chesapeake Bay. We use cover crops extensively. In fact, we are the state that can boast as the highest adopters of cover crops to including legumes that can fix nitrogen. By the way, cover crops are plants that are grown primarily to benefit the soil rather than for crop yield, harvest, or commercial sales. So this eco-friendly starting point in Maryland begs the question of whether transitioning from the conventional Maryland practices to the typical organic practices would cause an increase or decrease in the environmental impacts. So our study's overall goal is to find what I often call the sweet spot, where we can potentially balance the soil health, crop productivity, and profitability aspects at the same time, and find the most suitable strategy to transition to organic grain farming. So with that research goal in mind, we came up with 4 different organic transition strategies that differ in the degree of soil disturbance, even cover crop uses, and input use intensity. So the first treatment, that is treatment 1, is what the typical organic grain farmers do around the world. They use standard organic tillage, or they fully disturb the soil for cultivation for weeds, maximize harvestable crops, and use minimal cover crops, which is mostly usually a single species of either a grass or a legume, and the growing period for the cover crop is pretty short. So the second strategy was to use reduced tillage, where we use shallow tillage cultivation to control the weeds if necessary, and mostly rely on cover crops. We used at least 2 species of cover crops, 1 legume and another grass, for weed control and providing a nutrient as they decay to the cash crops. Treatment 3 is a bit special, where we try to use a concept called bio strip till, using our precision equipments, where we planted radish as a cover crop in fall. Once the temperature reaches around lower 20s in the winter, then the radish dies and decays and leaves a flaky, nutritious residue on the soil. We come back in the spring, we plant corn in the same exact radish rows as using our precision equipment, and try to gain all those benefits like soil loosening, nutrition from the decaying radish. So the 4th treatment in our study was perennial alfalfa grass hay. So after the initial establishment, then the soil remained untilled or undisturbed throughout the transition period, and we took multiple hay harvests per year. And this is a bit different. All the first 3 treatments, they grew grain, corn and soybean during the transition phase, while the treatment 4 grew alfalfa grass hay during the transition period. And so our specific research objectives were to evaluate the effects of the 4 transition strategies on the soil health indicators, crop growth, productivity, yield, and economic returns. Similarly, the composition, diversity, and functionality of microbial communities, and cover crop performance, weed pressure, and their interactions with environmental factors. The variables that I have highlighted in red, that's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. So some details about our field work. Our organic transition was initiated in spring of 2020, and we harvested our first organic certified corn in the fall of 2023. So the study was conducted in 4 different locations. 2 of them are in the eastern shore, 1 of them is in Wellsville, and the other one is in Frederick County. So 2 of them are the university research centers, Siamrek and Lesrek, and the other 2 are commercial farms. One of the farmer is a pretty experienced organic grower, and one was just about to explore the organic farming world. So the study type was randomized complete block design with each treatment replicated 4 times at each location, and the soil types ranged from sandy to silt loam. The individual plot sizes for each experimental unit differed depending on the study location, but all of them were large enough farm equipments like planter or combine harvester to work on them. And we tested the treatments 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the university research centers, but we could only test treatments, the first 3, 1, 2, 3, on the commercial farms due to the lack of hay making equipments with the farmers. So this is a bit busy slide showing our research timeline over the period of about 3.5 years. We began with spring oats as a uniformity trial in all treatments in the spring of 2020, and each of the treatment followed their own transition strategy. Treatment 1 involved pretty extensive tillage methods such as disking and cultivation, while treatment 2 and 3 involved a method that we have discussed in previous presentations by Melissa and Vivian, roller crimping for terminating the cover crops. Depending on the treatments, we grew cover crops such as winter pea, crimson clover, cereal rye, hairy vetch, and our crop rotation was 2020 spring oats, 2021 corn, 2022 soybean, and then 2023 our first certified organic corn. And after the completion of the transition phase in spring 2023, all the 4 plots were treated alike to assess the impact of the transition period. And throughout the transition and even after the completion of the transition phase, we periodically collected soil samples, mostly during the fall season. Similarly, we collected the cover crop biomass samples, weed samples, corn yield, and grain samples, and also conducted several on-field and lab measurements to assess the impacts of the different strategies on the soil and crop. So going to our soil sampling schedule, we collected samples in the fall 2020 as baseline. That was before the application of the treatments, and in fall seasons of 2021, 22, and 23. The soil ball density samples were collected with 10 to 12 cores. The core diameter was 3.1 centimeter up to the depth of 30 centimeter in the soil at an interval of 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and 20 to 30 centimeter. The soil samples were later dried to determine the ball density, which is basically the dry mass divided by the volume. We also looked at the permanganate oxidizable carbon epoxy using method described on a paper by Dr. Weil et al. 2003, which could be an early indicator of changes in the soil organic matter. Similarly, we looked at soil respiration rate by reweighting and incubating the air-dried soil samples for 24 and 72 hours and measuring the carbon dioxide released after those periods. Similarly, we looked at the aggregate stability by slaking method, where 6 soil aggregates from each treatment were immersed in water. They went through several tipping cycles, and their stability rating was determined as described by Herrick et al. We also looked at the nitrogen level in the soil by collecting what we call the pre-side rest nitrogen test, PSNT, from the top 30 centimeter of the soil at V5 stage of the corn, which is when corn plants have 5 true leaves and are around the knee-high stage. It obviously depends on your height, but and PSNT, it's a standard practice for Maryland farmers, and all Maryland farmers, they use this as a means to know the amount of nitrogen in the soil during the critical growth phase of the corn and apply most of the nitrogen during this stage. So for the PSNT samples that we collected, we sent the samples to the commercial lab for several tests like pH, soil organic matter, nutrients, organic matter lost by ignition. Similarly, we also looked at several agronomic variables. We counted the crop establishment in case of both corn and soybean. Similarly, we looked at the crop yield by hand harvest and also combine harvester, machine harvest. We also used 50 by 50 centimeter quadrants to measure the cover crop and weed biomass. So in the winter of 2023 and 2024, around February, March, we conducted a simulated rainfall experiment using an apparatus known as Cornell sprinkler infiltrometer, which is shown in the picture here. This device simulates the rain at the rate of about 0.5 centimeter per minute, which is a pretty heavy rain. And after some rainfall on the soil, the water starts to run off the surface since the soil becomes saturated. And we collected the runoff water until the runoff rate is steady, and analyzed the phosphorus orthophosphate phosphorus concentration in the runoff water using method as described in Pote and Daniel 2000. So we ran this experiment only at the CMREC Research Center due to logistics issues, because you have to carry jugs of DI water to several farms, which is pretty tedious. So I want to show you some pictures from the field. So these pictures show treatment 1 and treatment 4 at our Central Maryland Research Education Center, CMREC and LESREC. And these pictures were taken in November of 2020. To remind you, treatment 4 had been planted with perennial alfalfa grass hay, and treatment 1 had a single species of winter pea, which is a legume. The winter peas were planted in late September, while the hay crop was planted in August of 2020. Similarly, this is like a time series picture of how the treatment 3 looked like. This is a picture from our lower eastern shore site, LESREC. So we had 3 cover crops in this treatment 3: radish, rye, and crimson clover. They were planted in September of 2020 and terminated in May of 2021. So the cover crops are, cereal rye and crimson clover. They are pretty small, but they are still alive during the winter. However, the radish is supposed to die in the winter, and once spring starts, once the temperature starts to reach about 10-15 degrees, then the cover crops, they start to take off in the spring. The winter that year was not harsh enough to terminate the radish plant. As you can see, there is still a pretty decent radish row with some white flowers in the April of 2021. So here is the data on here is the data on the cover crop biomass in spring of 2021 from all 4 sites. As expected, treatment 1, it just had a single species cover crop, so it had lowest biomass compared to treatments 2 and 3 at all sites. So the dry matter in treatment 1 ranged between 1,000 to 4,000 kilograms per hectare, while in other treatments it was somewhere in between 4,000 to 10,000 kilograms per hectare. So the cover crops were terminated right before or after, right after planting the cash crops, and the cover crops, they are expected to release nutrients for our cash crops as they decay, along with other benefits such as weed suppression and moisture conservation. So, so far, the cover crops did pretty good, but now it was time for planting, and our aim was to get 32,000 plants per acre, which is 80,000 plants per hectare. However, with the cover crops, with a thick cover crop mat, getting the desired plant population, especially in treatments 2 and 3, with a heavier cover crop biomass, was challenging, as evident in the graphs. The major challenge was adjusting the proper planter depth in different treatments due to the varying degree of the thickness of the cover crop mat. The ideal depth for corn seed, it depends on the soil type, but it's usually 1.5 to 2 inches inside the soil. But it was challenging to adjust the planter setting to get to that depth. And similarly, at LESREC, or this is a farm work in overall, so you expect all sorts of variables At Lestrek especially, we had issues with the geese coming and picking up our seeds, and then that's why we saw really low corn emergence. There were also other issues like some wet spots in the field, which deplete the oxygen required for seed germination, and that's why those are the problems that we face with corn emergence. So the effects of lower corn emergence was pretty evident on the corn yield as well. The yield on different treatments, that varied between the different farms, but in 3 out of 4 farms, the corn yield, this is the yield by hand harvest, was higher in treatment 1 compared to the other 2 treatments. Our farm manager from farm B, like I said before, was a pretty experienced organic grower, and he's mostly used to typical organic practices, as most of the farmers do, and as it is reflected in the treatment 1. So it is clearly evident from the yield results as well, where treatment 1 yield was higher in his farm compared to the other 2 treatments. Another important lesson that we learned in this year was the appropriate selection and termination of the cover crops at the right time. So we had grown a diverse mix, more than 10 species mix of summer cover crops before the corn during the summer season, which included buckwheat. And buckwheat grows pretty rapidly in the warm season. So buckwheat went to seeding, and then, so many plants started to come up and compete with the corn, and that severely injured our yield, especially in the treatment 3. Lesson learned: identify your proper use of the cover crops as well. And so we did this regression tree analysis to show what factors affected the corn yield by hand harvest the most. And like we expected, as we saw in the field, plant density had the highest impact on the corn yield, followed by the weed dry matter biomass. And the following year, that is in 2022, we grew soybean in our field. So on the left, you can see soybean yield by hand harvest, and on your right, it is soybean yield by machine harvest. The hand and machine harvest data, they followed the similar trend, even though the machine harvest was consistently lower than the hand harvest, which is expected. Like before, the yields, like the corn, really depended on the sites, with our CMRIC, the Bellsville site, doing really decent in all 3 treatments, while the yield at Lestrek was again very nominal. Similar to what we saw in the corn, the experienced organic farmer handled soybean well in the treatment 1 compared to the other 2 treatments. I have not shown the yield data from our farm A, one of our sites, where we had almost no soybean yield that year. It is evident that maintaining the desired yield in organic system really depends on farmers' experience, appropriate use, availability, and the appropriate use of the equipments as well. And I just want to show you how the soybean plants look like in one of our treatments in 3 of our sites, Farm B, Lestrek, and CMREC. So this is treatment 3, and the picture was taken in the second half of August 2022. So the planting was done around the last week of May, and as we can see, in the middle plot, the Lestrek, which had a really low yield, looks pretty weedy, and so was the yield. The rightmost picture from CMREC looks pretty lush and weed-free. We were able to achieve this by planting the soybean in narrower rows, that's 7.5 inch. So soybean plants, they grow pretty fast. They close the canopy and hinder the sunlight for the weeds coming up. That's why they can eliminate the competition from the weeds. And on farm B, it's interesting. The farmer used a tool called weed chopper, where you go through the rows, you can electrocute and kill, especially the tall weeds, not all weeds, but tall weeds. That's why we were able to kind of obtain a mediocre yield in farm B. Again, the soybean plant count had a very strong influence on the soybean yield as well. So maintaining a decent crop stand is a key in achieving a proper yield in the organic cropping systems. As you can see, there is a there is really strong relationship between the soybean stand count and the soybean yield by combine. So now comes the spring of 2023, where we completed our organic transition phase, and all our treatments were managed uniformly across all treatments to assess the impacts of the different transition strategies, and they were all planted with first organic certified corn. So all plots were planted with hairy vetch and rye cover crop before the cash crop, which was corn. And the cover crop dry matter varied between the different sites and ranged somewhere between 5,000 to 12,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare before termination. On the left is a picture from CMREC, where we are on the top. We are using a roller crimper to terminate the cover crops. On the bottom left picture, it's a planter, and the farm manager and his assistant there, they are checking if the seed reached the appropriate depth inside the soil or not. And on the bottom right picture, it shows the field after the cover crop termination, and you can see the rows where the corn plant was planted, where the disc slightly opens, puts the seeds in, and then there's a spike that closes the rows, the soil. And finally, so here are our first organic certified corn yields from CMREC and Farm B in 2023. So you might be wondering, what about the data from the other two sites? So we again faced similar issues with the plant stand count and weeds. So the yield was really nominal in those two sites. So we decided not to include those data in this presentation. So on the left on CMREC, we can see that the yield in treatment 4 is significantly higher, almost double than the other three treatments. In the other treatments, the corn yield ranged around 5,000 kilograms per hectare, while in treatment 4, the corn yield was around 10,000 kilograms per hectare, which is comparable to what the conventional grain farmers get as a yield. So to remind you, treatment 4 was the one where we had alfalfa grass hay during the 3 years of transition. And at Farm B, we did not observe any significant effect of the treatment. The yield in all the treatments ranged around 4,000 kilograms per hectare. And to give you an idea, 10,000 kilograms per hectare, kilograms is about 160 bushels of corn. And so this graph shows the relationship between corn yield by machine harvest and hand harvest, and the relationship is pretty linear, but the yield by combine harvest is consistently lower than that of hand harvest. On the left, there is the farmer using the combine machine to harvest the corn, and on the right, this is me hand harvesting the corn. So again, we did a decision tree to investigate what factor affected the corn yield the most for our first organic certified corn, and it was weeds and weeds and weeds again, indicating how critical weed management is in organic farming system. And the chart on the right represents the relationship between the dry matter of weeds and yield of corn, and there is a clear trend showing that weed dry matter, as it increases, the yield of corn tends to decrease. This table, I'll have to say that I'm not an economist, but I did, we intend to, we have economists in our team who can probably do more complex analysis on the economic aspect of this. But I was interested in doing a simple calculation to see which strategy turned out to be the most profitable during the years of transition and after the completion of the transition. And this is the data only from one site, which is CMREC, where we noted the input costs, including all the supplies and the cost of planting, using the custom rates, and the revenues generated from the cash crop yield. And overall, treatment 4 seemed to be the most profitable, with a total profit of about almost $800 per acre from the first. This is from the first 4 years total, and so this is mostly contributed by the higher yield of the corn that we got in the got from our first organic certified crop. Followed the profit was followed by treatment 1, treatment 2, and the least profitable was treatment 3. And I quickly looked up how much the conventional farmers make per acre, conventional corn farmers make per acre, and it was in the range of about $200 to $300 per acre. So moving ahead to the soil health indicator results, here are some pictures of us sampling soil. As you can see in the pictures, we are wearing masks. So it was during the peak COVID season. It was in 2020. I think it's a picture from baseline soil sampling. So here we can, some people call it a spider plot or a radar plot, showing the effects of different treatments on several soil health parameters such as aggregate stability, crop yield, epoxy, PSNT, soil respiration. And so the values from all the variables were standardized to a similar scale of 0 to 1 before plotting the graph. And so the closer it gets to the outer circle, it represents the higher magnitude of a given parameter. And the properties with asterisk sign differ significantly between the treatments. And we saw a significant difference, like I presented before, in the yield, in the aggregate stability, soil respiration, and PSNT. So here is the result on the soil aggregate stability in our CMREC research farm. On the left, treatment 1 had a significantly lower stability score than treatment 4, while treatments 2 and 3 had a numerically higher stability score, but not statistically significant. Similarly, on the right, at farm B, treatment 1 had a significantly lower stability score compared to the other 2 treatments, and so the lower soil structure stability in treatment 1 is very likely explained by the frequent soil disturbances due to tillage events in that particular treatment. This is the data on the soil respiration, which can be an indicative of the available organic matter and the microbial activity in the soil, pertaining also to the soil fertility and availability of the nutrients to the plants. So on the y-axis, we have the carbon dioxide, carbon evolved in milligrams per kg of soil during the period of incubation of soil samples, which was either 24 hours or 72 hours. The blue bars represent results from the 72 hours incubation, and the red bars show the results from the 24 hours incubation. And so we saw no significant difference in the soil respiration between the treatments, either in 24 or 72 hours incubation at CMREC, but significantly higher soil respiration in both both incubations was observed in case of treatment 2 and 3 compared to treatment 1 at farm B, and this could be an indicative of the higher organic matter due to the higher biomass and residues from the cover crops and microbial activity in those treatments. And so this is the data on the pre-sidedress nitrate nitrogen test on the CMREC and farm B. So the soil samples were collected during the early growth stage of our first organic certified corn to determine how much nitrate nitrogen was available. And generally the recommended PSNT value in Maryland is 21 ppm. We were not able to reach that level with just our cover crops or our treatments, but the treatment 4 had significantly higher PSNT, almost double PSNT value compared to the other three treatments, and this most likely contributed to the higher nitrogen, higher yield that we observed in the treatment 4 corn. This is a result from our simulated rainfall experiment where we looked at the phosphate phosphorus concentration in the runoff water in the different treatments. This was only done in CMREC on the left. On the left diagram on the y-axis, you can see the cumulative phosphorus loss in grams per hectare, and on the x-axis, you can see the different treatments. So the phosphorus loss or the phosphorus concentration in the runoff water, it ranged between 100 to 250 grams per hectare due to the heavy rain that we simulated. And on the right, you can see that most of the phosphorus loss occurred in the first 10 to 15 minutes or so, and then it starts to level off since most of the phosphorus is already gone. So the take-home lessons from our study, as you can already tell, weeds are the major challenge in organic farming, and weed management is really critical. Similarly, the planting, the planter down pressure, the coulter, and the press fill management or adjustments are critical to the high crop yields, especially in organic grain with when we are using cover crops and when we intend not to disturb the soil. And reducing the soil disturbance had a positive impact on soil health parameters such as aggregate stability, respiration rate, and crop yield. And like I said before, weed biomass, initial crop stand, and aggregate stability, they were found to be associated with the corn yield. And so we were able to obtain certified corn crop yield, highest at treatment 4, which is likely due to the fewer weeds, since we had alfalfa grass hay growing through during the 3 years of the transition, and the higher nitrate nitrogen contributed by the perennial alfalfa hay stand during the transition, since alfalfa is legume. Overall, organic farming with no reduced tillage is challenging, but cover crops can definitely be of some help in that venture. And with this, I'd like to thank my advisor, Dr. Weil, my graduate supervisory committee members, the whole ENST community. Also thanks to the USDA and IFA for funding this research. Similarly, our collaborators, Future Harvest, Northeast Share, our soil quality lab team, all the undergrads and graduate students who have tirelessly helped me in the field for so many years. And UMD Extension collaborators, farm managers, which I should not forget. They were really helpful in implementing all our treatment plans. With this, thank you everyone, and I'm happy to take your questions if you have. Thank you.
we take a few minutes for questions, I'll just remind everyone you should have received the link to the evaluation form, so please take advantage of that. And those of you listening up on Zoom, I put it in the chat box. So, questions?
If we have it, yeah.
Yeah, great talk. So 2 questions. One is this issue with winter kill of cover crops is becoming more common. And so do you what should producers do? Do you think that we need to reconsider some of our cover crops that we're using, or does everybody need to purchase a roller crop? Or, this is happened many years now,
Mhm,
right? And so kind of what are you telling people about
Yeah,
it?
yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, I have heard about these issues, and we went through the same issue, that is not being killed. So far, maybe we could, look for varieties that are, more easily killed. The same crop, the cover crop, but through selective breeding programs like that, we could look for the same crops so that we can get similar benefits that we get from the cover crops like radish, which is a great cover crop, but to address this issue, yeah, we might have to look for options, and that's my take. And what was your other question?
And my other question was about the alfalfa. So
Uh-huh.
you mentioned the fact that sometimes it's really hard to find the market for things.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, if I look at your presentation and your research overall, is that really if I want to transition, the
Yeah.
best thing to do is plant alfalfa and leave it, and do hay for a couple of years, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
is there a market for that?
That's a really great question, and so you are probably referring to the economic analysis I did, which
Right.
treatment 4 turned out to be the most profitable.
Yeah.
But I will have to tell this that I used. We definitely have the harvest data. We know how much yielded, right? But we had faced similar challenges in marketing. I used the market rates depending on how much harvest we got to do the economic analysis. So I assumed that we were able to sell that. But in reality, it's really challenging. It's challenging to find a closer market. So to sell crops like hay or even organic crops. Yeah. So it's marketing is a challenge.
Yeah, so my question is in hydrology, water related. Great talk, really lots of work. Thank you. And you had for the rainfall simulation, if I read it correctly, 0.5 centimeter per minute.
Yeah, yeah.
That's like 30 centimeters per hour, which is 1 foot, 12 inches an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
That's even more than 100-year storm.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the criteria for selecting that? That can actually pound quickly at the top of the
Yeah.
saying, was that the intention to pound it and so forth? So that caught my eye.
Yeah, you're right. That's like rain in a century or so. It's a really heavy storm, and so we wanted runoff to occur, in the field. So we had to use a very heavy amount of rain so that we can get the desired runoff in the desired amount of time that we have in the field. But in terms, if you look at the natural rain, you are very right. It's not that we commonly are. It's very less likely that we see that amount of rain in the field.
So may I? I'm sorry. So if we were relating in other words, the different treatments of the organic production and runoff of the constituents such as suspended solids and nutrients and so forth, that kind of unusual storm, how much that actually relates to the average conditions that our farmers really deal with. I was just curious, maybe you didn't need that, you just needed to create the runoff. Again, that was curiosity for me.
So normally, if you see in the literatures, most of the runoff of the phosphorus from the soil that we get is when we get super heavy rains and in a very few minutes of the rain, that's when we get most of the runoff. So that's kind of related to what we did, relatable to what we did in the field. So I think it makes some sense in that terms. But to completely simulate the natural conditions, we would have to look for alternatives.
Yeah, so my overall question is planting more densely a solution to the weed problem? And I ask that because
Mhm.
I saw that in the later years, weed biomass was a big contributing factor.
Mhm,
And I saw also, maybe I'm connecting the wrong dots, but
mhm,
in the earlier years, the stand count, or what I'm assuming is the density,
mhm.
was also a contributing factor. So does that help at all? Or?
I would say it's a tricky thing, and it can be a double-edged sword also, because if you are planting close, you're planting your cash crops close, then there is competition among the crops as well, right? But I think you are referring to our soybean planting, where we were, planting them closer, and that really that helped in the case of soybean, and it depends on the crop that you are growing and your field conditions, right? So soybean, it's a legume, it grows really fast, it is pretty hardy plant compared to corn. It grows and closes the canopy pretty quickly, and then deprives the weeds on the ground from the sunlight, and that's how we can achieve weed control in case of soybean. But it may not be the same case in other crops like corn, which can suffer more severely from competition, and they do not extend the canopy as much as soybeans do.
All right, well, thank you very much, Biwek.